Hi, my name is Calvin Smith, and I'm the Executive Director and Speaker for Answers in Genesis Canada. And I've been speaking on the topic of biblical authority, biblical worldview, and the whole creation-evolution debate for almost 20 years now, all across Canada, sometimes internationally, and on TV as well. And during that time, I've spoken with thousands of fellow biblical creationists who were quite zealous about these topics, and they could really see that the watering down of Scripture and the compromise of adding millions of years and evolution are so damaging to the gospel message and the whole concept of biblical authority. However, I also noticed many of them were often frustrated when fellow believers just really didn't seem to get it. Many of them had joined a creation club or participated in conferences, but seemed to hit a brick wall when trying to convince many of their friends, church members, and pastors just how critical the issue was, especially when it was so obvious to them. So I began to see three specific pitfalls that these frustrated believers fell into over and over again. I mean, can you relate to your fellow biblical creationists here? Do you want to learn how to overcome these challenges? Well, just keep listening. How would you like to be 10 times more effective in your conversations? After we talk about the three biggest challenges, I'll share about an easy, effective method to have some great conversations with fellow believers. Great, in this instance, stands for gospel, relevance, evangelism, and apologetics training. But we'll get back to that later. Here are the top 3 roadblocks that I've heard. Problem number 1. Stop talking about science. I mean, the first mistake I see many biblical creationists make is that they think the best way to make fellow Christians excited about this issue is to talk to them about scientific evidences that support the Bible. Now, you might be thinking, well, isn't what that whole Answers in Genesis ministry is about? No. The message Ken Ham and Answers in Genesis has been proclaiming for years is the message of biblical authority. Now, don't get me wrong. Once you really understand the importance of this issue, scientific explanations in support of Scripture are extremely valuable to fortify the faith of believers and equip them to share the gospel effectively through apologetics. However, with few exceptions, it's the understanding of the relevance of this issue to the gospel and the concept of biblical authority that draws most people to understand the importance of the creation-evolution debate. I mean, think about it. Was it the understanding of how natural selection wasn't evolution that really interested you in the whole debate? Was it finding out that they found soft tissue in dinosaurs that ignited a passion for the issue? Probably not. Chances are, it was seeing a gifted speaker like Ken Ham connecting all the dots between the social issues and the fallout of youth in churches and the lack of gospel effectiveness and so forth that made something click in your mind. And you suddenly realized what's been going on in the church in the West and why Christianity in general has been eroded to such a frightening degree in our culture. Do you remember the first time you really understood the whole death before sin argument? How introducing millions of years into the Bible requires death before Adam sinned? And how powerful that was to the concept of a logical, consistent theological viewpoint? Do you remember when you realized that all Christian doctrines are founded in the book of Genesis and that without a literal Genesis, the gospel doesn't make sense? You likely do. And let me tell you what happened at that moment. You became motivated to look into the scientific evidences that support the Genesis account. Now, before Christians understand the relevance of Genesis and how this issue affects the gospel message, they will almost never be motivated to look into the scientific topics to a great degree, and therefore will still be open to compromise. Sadly, and I was guilty of this too, by the way, what happens with many of us is that when the blinders come off, so to speak, is we get excited about the science stuff and forget that it was the relevance of the issue that hooked us in the first place. And because most of us started studying the issue in depth, it's natural to want to teach what we know to others. But this teaching starts at the wrong place. For many fellow believers, never really get a big picture like we did. Again, don't hear what I'm not saying. Creation evidences are important. That's why Answers in Genesis has a whole slew of PhD creation scientists. The Answers Research Journal, Answers Magazine, a website, the Creation Museum, the Ark Encounter, loaded with apologetics displays and resources. It's just that the theological and social relevance is actually the most important aspect to convey, and that relevance will motivate others to understand the scientific arguments. So here's problem number 2. Don't be a creation pest. Now, did someone pop into your head when you read that? A creation pest? I mean, don't we all know that guy or gal who's so excited about this issue, it's pretty well all they talk about? And by the way, if no one popped into your mind, it's probably because you're popping into someone else's mind right now. Just saying. Now, I fully realize how incredibly important this issue is. And if you've ever heard me teach or preach upon the subject, you know how important I believe it is. However, I think some people need to learn a little bit of balance in this area. It's kind of like getting around a conspiracy theory enthusiast. Somehow the conversation just always seems to end up about conspiracies. Well, some people hardly talk about anything other than the creation issue. And until others see how crucial an issue is, they can become somewhat overwhelmed by enthusiasts of any topic, really. I heard an analogy once that might help you to understand what I'm saying here. Now, assuming you live in a house, and the majority of the time that you do, you're going to be walking around on the main floor or upstairs in the bedroom areas. Now, occasionally you're going to pop downstairs into the basement, check on your foundation, make sure there are no leaks, and see if everything's solid. And then you're going to go back upstairs and live life upstairs again. That's where the people are, and there's sun and fun, and there's food and fellowship, so to speak. Now, this origins issue is the foundation of your theology. So the first time you checked on the foundation and you found that there's some huge cracks in it, you likely reacted strongly and spent a lot of time down there and fixing it up. And if your neighbor's foundation had problems, you'd likely want to help him out too. But you don't live in your basement. I mean, hopefully. Every now and then, you're going to go downstairs and make sure everything's okay. But if that's all people see you do is live down there, it can seem a little abnormal to them. And if you're constantly trying to drag them down into the basement with you, well, it can alienate them. These are the very people you're trying to reach with this important message. So you want to be like a duck, calm and cool above the surface of the water, but underneath, you're paddling like crazy. I mean, keep your zeal and enthusiasm for this incredibly important issue. Just learn to temper your enthusiasm and help people realize that they've got holes in their foundation in a more focused or whimsical way, shall we say. Which leads to problem number 3. Break the habit of miscommunication. Now, I'm going to break this problem down into 2 parts because I actually see 2 extremes in the communication department that I'd like to address here. One is that some people don't feel they can communicate at all, and that 2, some people are over-communicators, so to speak. Let's start with the first type. Let's face it, not everybody can speak like Ken Ham or Dr. David Menton or whoever you think is a particularly gifted speaker on the Genesis issue. I mean, I've often met people that look at a speaker on stage and think, well, I could never do that. And they're right. Most people will never be able to speak like Ken Ham. However, that's why we have a huge selection of amazing resources that you can use to pass on information to others. I mean, the good news is you don't have to be a confident communicator to pass on the message. Answers in Genesis is your support system. Your goal is to simply match up the right resource with the right person you know when the opportunity presents itself. And that could be an Answers magazine, a DVD, or a book that you give to a person in need of truth. And if this sounds like you, then watch to the end where I'm going to share a free resource with you to make sharing a whole lot easier. Now, the second type is the over-communicator. Some people just want to download all of their vast knowledge on this topic into the brains of everyone they know. But think this through. Have you ever started talking to someone and then you realized that you knew way less about the topic than they did? I mean, how comfortable did you feel? If someone just keeps going on and on and on about something when you even really had a chance to process even some basics, you can be overwhelmed. And because most of us biblical creationists have a vast library of resources we've studied, we often don't realize that we can kind of come off like a fire hose when someone only needs a little sip of water. We need to control the amount of volume we're producing. In other words, we sometimes need to take it down a notch. So here's the solution. We've looked at 3 major roadblocks to sharing the message of biblical authority with fellow Christians. Now I want to talk to you about how to overcome all of these with one simple tool: great conversations. I'm going to show you how to have a great conversation with fellow Christians on the importance of the origins issue. And as I mentioned earlier, GREAT stands for Gospel, Relevance, Evangelism, and Apologetics Training, Conversations. So this tool is simple. It's a fill-in-the-blank outline that anyone can use for a 15 to 20-minute conversation with a fellow believer. It's streamlined. It's basically a streamlined version of the main talk that Ken Ham's been doing for years, and it works. It's designed to resonate with Christians quickly and easily so that the pressure's off you. And at the same time, it'll focus the conversation so you don't go off on a whole bunch of rabbit trails if you tend towards over-communicating. Along with this outline, I'll provide you with some time-tested advice and training on how to set up a meeting to use the outline, and then give you some specific guidelines on how to follow up with them using great resources. It's easy, it's friendly, it's field-tested, and it's absolutely free from us to you. Now, here's what you need to do. Just click the link below and learn how to go out and have some great conversations with some friends and family that you know.